Hello and welcome to another conversation with Middle East Monitor. My name is Nassim Ahmed and I will be your host for today's discussion, which is the crackdown on pro-Palestinian activism. For many, the Gaza genocide has exposed the limits of free speech. Over the past 20 months, we've seen campaigners and activists being detained, imprisoned for opposing Israel's military assault on Gaza. New laws have been introduced as democracies take an authoritarian turn. Is freedom of speech held as one of the founding principles of the West, if not the founding principle, under threat? And does Palestine expose the limits of free speech? I am joined by solicitor Fahad Ansari to discuss these issues. Fahad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nassim, for having me.
So it's good to have you on our podcast, Fahad. I hope you don't mind me calling you Fahad. Fahad is a solicitor specializing in immigration, asylum, and nationality law. His law firm, which has been newly branded as Riverway to the Sea, launched a legal challenge in April calling for the proscription of Hamas, which we will discuss later on. I want to really speak to him about the legal work his firm is doing in defending activists against the draconian measures we see being rolled out on both sides of the Atlantic. But before I do that, I want to get your general observations on the picture I've just painted. How would you describe the climate, at the moment? Is free speech under attack? Is Israel the limit of free speech? Do you feel the Gaza genocide exposed a deeper systematic intolerance towards critics of Israel and, as I said, the limits of free speech?
Thank you. In one sense, nothing has changed in terms of the limitations about free speech, about what is and is not acceptable comment about the Middle East. It's been like this for decades. You know that, I know that. I mean, the whole world knows that. The only difference this time around is the fact that they're unable to conceal it, to hide it, to garnish it, to dress it up, because of the fact that we have social media. People are no longer reliant on the propaganda and lies, put out by the BBC and other mainstream legacy media. People now can see it for themselves, what is happening in Gaza, what Israel is all about, and what Zionism looks like, the bare naked reality of Zionism. What the West and the governments in the West are struggling with now is how to contain the reaction, the normal human reaction to barbarity, to violence, to oppression, because every single human being is conditioned naturally to resist something as evil as Zionism, to resist fascism. What the governments of the world do is they try to condition you in the opposite direction to make this this is not normal to resist. This is a criminal act. But the genie's out of the bottle. You've seen it with the student encampments. You've seen it with Glastonbury, with an increasing number of celebrities and artists who hitherto would never have dreamed of sacrificing their careers to stand up for Palestine. But we've hit a point where people can no longer remain silent. And the fact that the British government and others are cracking down even more on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, contrary to their own stated belief system and ideologies, demonstrates one overarching theme, that Zionism is dying. It's weak. It's on its knees. And this is what we're seeing in Gaza, and to a British context, what we're seeing in terms of the repression of protest movements and the suppression of freedom of speech in this country, it all points towards the same thing, that the ideology is finished. They are desperate to try to maintain it, and they will do whatever they can to silence it. But ultimately, it's game over for Zionism.
And what surprised me is how quickly they've used some of the toolkits of authoritarian regimes, like redefining terrorism, using definitions that chill free speech, police what people can and cannot say. These are things which are commonly associated with the police state. But when it over the years, we've seen how there's been a strong defense of free speech when condemning Muslims who engage in violent activities or in defense of free speech to criticize Islam. We've seen that when it comes to Israel. We've seen over the, even before October 2023, before the genocide in Gaza, how, there was a reluctance and opposition to police speech when it comes to criticizing Islam and Muslims. But we've seen the tide changing. We've seen new definitions being introduced. We've seen the chilling effects of the IHRA, for example, which is a really politicized definition of anti-Semitism. And I guess your law firm is on the front line on this. So can you just give a flavor of the kind of cases you're having to deal with, you're involved in because of this shift to policing people's speech when it comes to Israel?
I mean, I'll just clarify that the descent of Britain into authoritarianism has not happened in the last 21 months. It's been happening for 3 decades. The entirety of the war on terror and the framing of that was intended to strip away civil liberties and human rights. We had people interned without trial. We had young Muslims being arrested and charged and convicted for possession of items useful for a terrorist, namely a map of the London Underground. Things as ridiculous as this. We had people being convicted in the past of supporting revolutions in Libya, in Iraq, in other places, simply for exercising their freedom of speech. I think what changed now in terms of Palestine is that the proportion of people who are being targeted now has extended beyond the Muslim community, and that's why it's become a mainstream issue. But Muslims have been dealing with this for the past 3 decades. When you talk about a police state, I can roll off examples for you, but that's not the purpose of today. In terms of the type of cases that I've had to deal with over the last few years, particularly in the last 21 months, in terms of freedom of speech, we've had students who've had their visas revoked or taken away for making speeches in support of the resistance. I've had a client who had his visa revoked, a brilliant AI scientist. He had his visa revoked because they found on his phone, on his WhatsApp, when he stopped at the airport, that he had distributed on a WhatsApp group a document circulated by Hamas about its version about what happened on the 7th of October. That document is widely available across media networks, including Israeli media. It's been published as addendums to books about Hamas. It's everywhere. He circulated this without comment. Nobody commented in response, and it moved on. The police were not interested in arresting him or raiding his property, but when he came to the Home Office, they revoked his visa and he's not allowed back into the UK. We've had in the employment sector, that's really where the freedom of speech has hit us. Because of the Zionist lobby, people like UK Lawyers for Israel and the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism just spend their entirety of their pitiful existence sitting around looking at people's social media and reporting them to their employers. It literally is I want to see the manager type of ethos with them. They make these reports saying this person has called Israel a Nazi state. They are anti-Semitic. Look at the IHRA definition. Person involved gets suspended. There's an investigation. He's reported to his professional regulator. And this is the bread and butter of what me and Frank have been dealing with for the past 21 months. It's horrific. The fact is not that the lobby, which is its own stated purpose, is to protect and support the apartheid state of Israel. The issue for me is that why are employers, why are universities, institutions, why are regulators entertaining complaints from openly racist Islamophobic organizations who say their raison d'etre is to support Israel, a state that is on trial for genocide, whose leader is wanted for war crimes, and who has been declared, and which has been declared to be an apartheid state by the World Court? Why on earth are you taking any complaints seriously from the likes of their cheerleaders?
And that's a common complaint many pro-Palestinian activists will make, why are we limiting free speech here? Why are we targeting free speech, and our own citizens are stripping their rights away to defend a foreign state and the rights of a foreign state? So it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Why is our own state turning on its own citizens? And that's a routine complaint. And so just to add to that, I mean, one of the organizations that's at the sharp end of this now, or victim of this, is Palestine Action, which the UK government is seeking to label as a terrorist organization. And now that, for a lot of people, that may come as a shock, partly because if we look back over the years, 1990s, in the 2000s, there were many, protests against military installations, targeting nuclear weapon sites, and they were never, these groups and these individuals were never, labeled as terrorist organizations. Of course, one couldn't prosecute them for criminal damage, but the idea of labeling them, prescribing them as terrorist organizations was not something which the government ever entertained. But now, as we've spoken, the government has taken a different turn, an authoritarian turn, and Palestine Action seems to be, a victim of that. So how would you see this attempt to put Palestine Action on the terror list? And what would be the implication of that?
So the first point is that why is Britain targeting its own citizens to protect Israel? Is because Israel is Britain's settler colonial project in the Middle East. Remember history, Britain was the one who signed off on the agreement to give the land of Palestine to the Zionists, to promise them the creation of a state there. It's in Britain's interests for Israel to remain, and that's the policy. So Britain isn't doing this because of any heavy lobbying from Zionists. Britain is doing it because it fundamentally, the British state, the British establishment, believes in Zionism. It adopts Zionism as a foreign policy. And so it will do whatever it takes to protect its interest in the Middle East. With respect to Palestine Action, I wrote a briefing many years ago in 2005, 2006 for the Islamic Human Rights Commission when I was a researcher there on anti-terrorism laws in Britain. So that's going back 2 decades. And we were looking at the Terrorism Act in that briefing, and we talked about the fact that the report's called A Modern Day Witch Hunt. And looking at the Terrorism Act and proscription, we saw that the definition encompassed of terrorism itself encompassed damage to property if it was done for a political reason. We said that definition is so broad and combined with bad faith actors in the government that it could be used to prescribe legitimate protest groups. That was 20 years ago. We sort of called it at the time that if you legislate in such a broad and expansive manner, it's not an accident that Parliament legislates that way. It's intended to give the executive the power when it wishes to implement such laws. And we see it now. It took 20 years, but now because they want to ban Palestine Action, because it is the most effective protest group in the country that is causing severe damage to Zionism and is causing people to think twice about supporting Israel militarily. Because Palestine Action is so effective, the government is now using the power the Parliament gave it to try to ban them as a terrorist organization and put them in the same category as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's ludicrous when you actually think it down. So today, I think 7 UN special rapporteurs wrote to the British government publicly saying that you cannot ban and prescribe Palestine Action on the basis of this law. This is just fundamentally wrong. This is not terrorism. As you said, Naseem, it's criminal damage. But again, this latest escalation is only part and parcel of a pattern that has been in place for decades, whereby the Terrorism Act itself is superfluous. We do not need it. Any action that has been prosecuted as terrorism, there were existing criminal laws there to prosecute people, whether it's criminal damage, whether it's murder, whether it's arson, whether it's plotting to kill. It was all there. The terrorism label is just politicized, and it enables governments to eviscerate any motivation that could be there behind an act, and instead just demonize it as terrorism lose the sympathy of a prospective jury just by using the T word in light of 9/11 and 7/7 and various other acts of political violence we've seen over the past few decades. And that's why it's a problem. So Cage International, Islamic Human Rights Commission, and others have been campaigning for the abolition of the Terrorism Act for a long time now. And I think if we want to see a pushback against authoritarianism, we can't deal with the symptoms, which is what this prescription of Palestine Action is. We need to deal with the root problem, which is the abolition of all terrorism laws in this country.
What would be the direct impact of having an organization like Palestine Action prescribed as a terror organization to British citizens? I mean, as far as I know, people who are members of Palestine Action are your average teachers, nurses, doctors. These are the kind of people that make up the rank and file of Palestine Action. So what would be the ramification of that?
So the ramifications are quite serious. When a group is prescribed, certain offenses kick into play. So it obviously becomes an offense to be a member of the group. It becomes an offense to have a meeting with a member of the group. So if and a meeting is, as long as there's only 2 people, it's okay. If there's 3 people, it becomes a criminal offense to be in that meeting, punishable by up to 14 years in prison. It's an offense to display an emblem or a flag or a symbol that a reasonable person might think that you're a supporter of that prescribed group, Palestine Action. It's a terrorism offense to invite support for Pal Action. It'll become a terrorism offense to express support for Pal Action or express a belief that could be seen to be supportive. So it's very broad. It's essentially putting them in the same category as Hamas at the moment, whereby you can't have a nuanced conversation about Hamas without risking breaking the law. Now, remember what happens is, even if you're not breaking the law, you have the lobby.
I mean, why Hamas? ISIS. It would be essentially the same thing as calling them on the same level, ISIS.
The reason I say Hamas in this example is that Hamas shouldn't be in that list either. And by putting them in the list of ISIS, you look at the trajectory. You've got ISIS and Boko Haram, these groups. Then you're putting in what many would see as legitimate resistance groups like Hamas or Hezbollah. And then you bring it down to protest groups like Pal Action. But ultimately, the impact is going to be the same. You can't have a conversation about Palestine Action then. The same way you can't have a conversation about whether Hamas have legitimate aims, whether they should be deprescribed. You're going to have that Palestine Action coming into that category. Now, the intention is to dehumanize, that these people are so beyond humanity, we can't even have a conversation with them about their aims, objectives, about who they are, what they want to do, because they are terrorists. They are a prescribed terrorist group. That's the intention. My gut feeling is that people will understand that while you can ban the organization, Palestine Action, you cannot ban the action within Palestine Action. And that there's such a strong feeling of revulsion to what's going on, that a number of activists are going to carry on with the direct action under different names. Already a group has formed calling itself Yvette Cooper. Now, who's the name of the Home Secretary? Is Yvette Cooper going to ban Yvette Cooper is the question. How many groups can she ban? And the fact that she's thrown Palestine Action in with 2 other, I think, Russian groups to try to prescribe all in the one order just shows how weak her position is, and she knows it, and the government knows it. So the intended effect of this is to repress free speech, to criminalize lawful behavior in a way that hasn't happened before. But my feeling is that it's going to backfire. It's going to backfire the way the British state has often extended its overreach, and it's resulted in a backlash. It happened in Ireland with the 1916 suppression of those fighters. It happened recently with NECAP. I don't think they expected such public support. NECAP were hardly the most popular band in the world prior to their members being prosecuted for terrorism.
I didn't know NECAP.
Now,
Never heard of them.
I was at the court, Westminster Magistrates Court. Over 1,000 people on a working morning turned up. As they came out of the court, went in, they were mobbed. Someone described them as the British government has made them into the Beatles. Their content is selling out in seconds. They're going after Bob Villan now. Again, he's doubling down. He's not apologizing, and he is going to become one of the heroes who resisted this genocide.
I mean, some people will say, I mean, it's one thing defending Palestine Action and organizations that are, British, and you're a British legal firm, you're British yourself, but it's another thing to.
Sorry, I'm just going to clarify. I'm not
Okay.
British. I never have been. I'm
Okay.
Irish. And
Sorry, you're
I'm
Irish.
Irish.
Okay, you're Irish. But it's another thing to try and defend a prescribed terrorist group, foreign prescribed terrorist group, which I'm talking about Hamas here. I mean, one could believe Hamas, one can argue Hamas is a resistance group as much as they want, but the UK has prescribed that organization, and your law firm is seeking to disprescribe Hamas. So I'm just, bit confused, well, many viewers will be confused. What is the legal argument behind that? Are there precedents for that in trying to prescribe an organization that has been, criminalized or, put on the terror list by a government? Is there, can you speak about that?
Yeah, of course. So if a group is prescribed, Parliament recognized, as we've just discussed, the grave implications of prescription. And the fact that it happens without a trial, without a hearing, is just a decision by the government to prescribe a group, that there has to be a remedy to get it off the group. And that remedy was Section 4 of the Terrorism Act 2000, which is a section by which we're making this application on behalf of our clients, Hamas. And that application is, and the government actually said this, the Home Office Minister said, it's to prevent an abuse of the power, that if a government abuses the power, it should be open to an organization to try to remedy that defect. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're saying that when Priti Patel, the Home Secretary who was in power, who prescribed Hamas, we say that, or our clients say, that that was an abuse of power, that nothing had changed in terms of how Hamas was behaving. Hamas has always had a distinction between its political wing and its military wing. The military wing was, of course, prescribed over 20 years ago during the Al-Aqsa Intifada, when it was causing severe damage to Zionism. But the political wing was always there. It won elections. It was engaged by politicians in this country and around the world. It was subjected to a genocidal siege, and it carried on governing to the best of its ability. Every time Israel sent in a military incursion, the military wing would resist that incursion. But now, in November 2021, nothing of substance had really happened, apart from the fact that in May that year, Israel invaded the Gaza Strip, again killing 250 civilians, including 66 children. We were then beginning the real age of social media and virality, and those videos were going viral. Young people in particular in this country took to the streets. There were spontaneous protests in playgrounds and primary schools, secondary schools, people bringing in flags and Palestinian badges and having demonstrations at lunchtime in the canteen. The government did not know what to do. The education secretary at the time had to issue an order to head teachers saying, you need to clamp down on what he described as the rise in anti-Semitism. So again, you see that sort of false conflation of anti-Semitism with anti-Israel or anti-Zionism. And ultimately, that resulted in a clampdown on people showing solidarity. Priti Patel, when she banned the political wing, she justified it by talking about protecting Britain's Jews from anti-Semitism. So you can see that link. That's the only significant development that led her to do. We say that's an abuse, right? Anti-Semitism, whether it's genuinely felt or not, is no reason to call a group a terrorist group. Your viewers might say, well, Hamas does engage in terrorism. And the application says very clearly that they do not dispute that. According to the definition under the UK legislation, Hamas does get involved in terrorism, as does the Ukrainian army, as do the British Armed Forces, because the definition is so broad as to encompass any act of political violence for the furtherance of your religious or political ideology. So, the IDF are involved in terrorism. But it goes down to a political decision, a discretion on the Home Secretary. There are hundreds of groups around the world she could prescribe. But why does she prescribe Hamas? Because she's politically compromised. This is the same Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who was fired from a previous ministerial position because she was found to be having secret meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu, an indicted war criminal now, and other senior Israeli officials. Theresa May at the time was the prime minister, had no idea this was happening. So, this woman is politically compromised. She does not need the lobby. She is the lobby. So I think this is something that Hamas want to address, that this was an abuse. Britain historically has always kept a window of dialogue open with the political wing of any militant outfit, whether it's the IRA, whether it was the ANC and the MK in South Africa. And because that dialogue can happen, we have found peace in Ireland, we found peace in South Africa. What this current prescription does, it acts as a major obstacle to the end of the violence and ability for parties to come to a political settlement.
I want to get to the politics of designating a group as a terrorist organization later on. But before I do that, I just wanted to quickly ask you about the criticism your firm has faced, yourself have faced. You're called the Hamas lawyer, for example. So how do you respond to some of those accusations? Just to, give you the opportunity to debunk some of the claims that are being made that you're being funded by Hamas and things like that. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm really grateful for you asking that question because it does come up time and time again, and not least because the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who today attacked another judge over a decision, decided to report me to my regulator, report me to the police, and God knows who else, on the basis that I allegedly must have broken the financial sanctions, because how else would I have funded this case? And that it was sickening that I was bringing an application to deprescribe Hamas. As I've explained, it's a legal application. Parliament intended you to have it. Other firms have taken applications for other prescribed groups in the past. Nobody has been targeted in this way. Jenrick brought this. Let's go through the accusations. The most serious one he says is that I breached the financial sanctions. There's not an iota of evidence for him to say this, but ultimately it was, again, as I said to you, I'm not so concerned about him making a racist allegation. I'm upset that the regulators have acted upon that racist allegation, and without any evidence to show, have started an investigation into me. We sought our advice from the OFSI, which is the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation. We sought advice from them, from external counsel. A barrister got a commissioned an opinion. Can we act for Hamas on a pro bono basis, or do we need a license? They say you need to get a license from the Treasury. That's a cumbersome process. And we decided instead of doing that, let's just act pro bono, because we need to, pro bono meaning without payment, because we need to end the violence. And it's urgent that we do this. We can't be waiting a long time for this license to come through. Myself, the two barristers instructed, and the 20 independent experts who gave evidence in support of this application all acted on a pro bono basis. Those experts include John Dugard, an ex-judge of the International Court of Justice. They include Professor Avi Shleim, a Israeli-British professor at Oxford.
So just so John Dugard, he led the ICJ case on behalf of South Africa.
Correct. Yeah. So it's this allegation seems to smear all of us together. And obviously it's me who's been specifically targeted. But I'm cooperating with the investigation. There's been no payment taken. It has been done pro bono. I was asked, well, how would you profit out of it? I said, I don't profit out of it. You can see my accounts. It's not a profitable venture, but sometimes when you have integrity, you have to do stuff on a pro bono basis. We do that all the time with other clients. The other allegations are that we must support Hamas, which would be a criminal offense, because we're taking this case on a pro bono basis. So you either taking money and you're breaching the sanctions, or you must be supportive as to why else would you do it. Again, that's ludicrous. And it's dangerous, because what you're doing is you're identifying a solicitor with his client. This is what led to solicitors in Ireland during the height of the troubles over there being murdered in cold blood by loyalist paramilitaries who were acting in collusion with the British state. So you had a Home Office minister make similar allegations about a man called Pat Finucane. And Pat Finucane used to defend, he's a criminal defense lawyer, many of his clients were members of the IRA. This Home Office minister said in Parliament that unfortunately we have a situation now where solicitors are in the pockets of militant groups like the IRA, and he named him. Less than 2 weeks later, Finucane was shot dead in his home while having lunch with his wife and 3 kids in front of them. Later on, decades later, the inquiry showed that those gunmen were acting in collusion with the British state. So when Robert Jenrick and others who are very familiar with the history of this, when they make these allegations, they know what they're doing. They are putting a target on our backs. They are endangering us. And it's a very, very sinister path to go down. Our firm has been inundated with abusive calls and death threats. Our staff have had to take time off, and we're being investigated at different levels. We're not going to back down. We're not afraid of these, because at the end of the day, at least, thank God, our babies aren't being shredded to pieces in front of us. Our homes aren't being incinerated, and we're not being brutalized on a daily basis. But it just shows to you that when you stand for Palestine, you stand against Zionism, there is going to be consequences. Bob Villan is facing those consequences right now. Kneecap are facing those consequences. Gary Lineker faced those consequences. But it seems that no one cares anymore. People have seen enough. They don't want to see the bloodshed anymore. They're going to take a stance, because our grandchildren will ask us about this. What did you do during the genocide? So bring it on, Generic, anybody else campaigning against anti-Semitism. We're here, we'll deal with the allegations. It's a distraction. We know what the idea is, to distract from the actual work we need to be doing. So my message to anybody else who's targeted in this way, deal with it, get lawyers involved, but don't stop what you're doing, because the moment you stop, they've won.
Yeah. And talking about, linking solicitors with their clients, I mean, one of the biggest advocates of Israel, Alan Dershowitz, he's constantly defending people who are, he's seen as the Epstein's lawyer, or he defended so many criminals throughout the year, and he's one of the biggest defenders of Israel itself, which is committing genocide. So if you wanted to link lawyers with their clients, I mean, he'd be the first one you'd look at, but no one does that, I guess. No.
Well, I mean, he's part of an. I could be wrong, but I think he's part of Netanyahu's legal team.
That's right. Yeah,
So,
he's part of.
it's, and again, that's just right. Netanyahu as a defendant, has the right to have a lawyer, and that lawyer shouldn't be identified with Netanyahu. That's
not identified with Epstein.
with Epstein. Yeah, exactly. If we go down that route, I mean, all of us are going to be guilty of one thing or another.
Yeah. So returning back to the politics of putting organizations on a terror list, like Hamas, for example. I mean, I know Tony Blair, he famously regretted cutting ties with Hamas. Jack Straw, he came to a conference we held many years ago. He said, it was a mistake to isolate Hamas and place Hamas on a terror list and things like that. And then, I mean, this week there are talks now in Washington of removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the terror list after lifting sanctions on Syria. So, I mean, that would be an extraordinary development, given, the HTS, people say, has an affiliation with Al-Qaeda. So, I mean, to talk about that a bit in relation to Hamas. And at one time, Hamas was seen, British officials were engaging, and now since Priti Patel, there was a massive shift away from the position of Blair and people like Straw. And then now we see also, terror organizations linked to Al-Qaeda being removed from the terror list. So there's a real politics behind who is and is not a terror organization. There isn't a objective definition. It's all to do with the flow of, which direction politics is moving at the time. It's very much a political decision rather than a legal decision. So can you just speak about, the politics of putting organizations and removing organizations from a terror list?
One of the criticisms that our detractors made of our application was that it read like a political diatribe, in the quote of one of the critics. And there was very political and hardly any legal argument in it. I mean, I don't agree with the latter part. There's a lot of international law and domestic law provisions in there. But it wasn't divorced from the political context, because that is incredibly important, because these are political decisions. They're not legal decisions. They're grounded in politics. So you have to understand that background. You've just pointed out an example. I'll point out an earlier example, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the LIFG, the Muqatila Islamiyah. These guys were a Libyan group who were opposed to Colonel Gaddafi. Gaddafi at the time obviously was an enemy of the British state. Tony Blair then went out and tried to make a deal with him, to negotiate, trying to bring him in from the cold. later documents revealed what we all suspected, that when Blair came back from Libya on that trip, suddenly a lot of the Libyan dissidents who had been given asylum in this country because they were opposed to Gaddafi started being rounded up, detained, prosecuted for terrorism, for trying to plot a coup against Gaddafi. And so suddenly they were being in and out of prison, thrown in prison in Belmarsh. Control orders were put on them when they came out. And they were used as a justification to roll out more draconian powers on every 3 or 4 years. Fast forward to the Libyan revolution and Gaddafi being ousted and Britain's policy suddenly changing again. These same men were suddenly voluntarily returning to Libya to take part in that revolution. And when David Cameron arrives in Libya, they're his bodyguards. I mean, they are his bodyguards, and then that's part of the negotiation that the LIFG is then deprescribed. So,
Yeah,
it's
extraordinary.
extraordinary. So what we say with you talk about not speaking to Hamas, you will speak to Hamas. As you point out in Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, he is now being, quoted in all the capital cities of the West. They are lifting sanctions. They've
He's a
lifted.
good man. He's a handsome man, according to Trump, you know.
Yeah. So regardless of his looks, I mean, the point being is that the one aspect of it is that the West respects power. They respect the fact that people have met it. Trump has also said stuff about Ansar al and the Houthis, that they did a really good job. They resisted us. So they respect, power. They respect might. And a few years ago, they negotiated with the Taliban as well. The whole war on terror started with that. 20 years later, they're back in power because of negotiations. So that's what I'm saying with Hamas. The people who say, "Oh, you can't speak to these people, they're terrible monsters." I mean, this is getting boring. How many more kids have to die before you actually swallow your pride and realize this is not working? Hamas are representative of a significant portion of the Palestinian population. They won the last elections. They are winning. If you had an election tomorrow, they're most likely to win again. So,
I mean, to state the obvious, though, I mean, you are talking. The US is talking behind the scene, in negotiations. So, yeah.
so they are talking. Britain itself is officially not talking because, I mean, they probably are behind the scenes, but even they can't even admit that because of the prescription, and it would go against what their stated purpose is. So we know that ultimately a time will come. It will take courage. It took courage in Ireland, it took courage in South Africa. Some politicians have to be willing to say, you know what, I'm going to go speak with these guys. We have to stop the bloodshed. We have to stop this genocide. And if your understanding is that it's not possible because we can't speak to people who win elections, we can't speak to people who have a vested interest and who are going to have a vested interest forever in that land, then you are adopting the ideology and the language that Israel adopts of genocide. The language of the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, when he says there's no civilians in Gaza, there's no such thing. And he explained that justification, but these are the people who voted for Hamas. They could have overthrown the government, but they didn't. That means everybody's complicit. That's the same type of rhetoric, in essence, that when people say, well, you can't negotiate with the Palestinians. Now, what do all the commentators today are talking about, taking in asylum seekers from Gaza? We don't want any Gazans, because they're a security risk, because they've engaged in that same dehumanizing language criminalizes all Palestinians and all people in Gaza specifically. So I think it's a very, very dangerous territory we're on. We are in the midst of genocide on every front. We can see it. We all know it. I mean, yes, people say, oh, we have to wait for the ICJ to make a ruling. No, we don't. We have to stop a genocide before it happens. And if everyone can sense it, everyone can see it for what it is, then it is mandatory upon us to do whatever it takes. And that means speaking with people that we don't like, that we don't see eye to eye with. We might not agree with everything they do. And many people who supported this application, they don't see eye to eye with Hamas. They disagree with them fundamentally. But they do support the application because there's a wider public interest in having that discussion and in lifting the ban in order for peace to prevail.
And what is the situation at the moment? What's the status of the application? I mean, Yvette Cooper has something like 90 days to respond. So what's the situation at the moment now?
Yeah, so
It's
she's
been 2 months. It's been 2 months now. Well, 6 weeks, I think.
So it's lodged on the 9th of April, so she would have 90 days from then, so presumably the 8th or 9th of July So that's pretty much in a week's time to make a decision. We're not holding our breath because in other cases where deprescription applications have been made, she has gone well beyond those, not her, but the Home Secretary has gone well beyond the 3 months. It may well be that she wants to get rid of it and make a quick decision on it, but we'll see next week.
So I want to finish off this section by talking about your law firm. So it's undergone changes since you launched the campaign to deprescribe Hamas. And now it's Riverway Law is now Riverway to the Sea. So why did you feel the need to make these structural changes?
So there's a few reasons. We've been talking about this for several months about the need to expand to fill a gap in the industry, whereby we talked about all the cases that we're receiving, that we're inundated, and it seemed that many of the cases were just coming and oscillating between myself, Frank, Daniel, and a couple of other lawyers. It's the same 5 or 6 lawyers everyone seemed to be going towards. We tried to increase capacity by asking other lawyers and solicitors and barristers to take on the cases. For some reasons, there's a reluctance. It could be because it wasn't paying enough. It could be because there was a risk to reputation being associated with such cases. And those who did take them on didn't have the understanding of how to fight them. The way we've been fighting these cases is to go into court and talk about the fact that Israel is an apartheid state, and Zionism is a fascist ideology, and this needs to be taken on. That's the context within which anything else happens. That's an unusual approach, but it's the correct approach in our opinion, because that's the context in which we have to fight these cases. You will get browbeaten by judges. You will get perhaps ridiculed by other lawyers. But ultimately, when a judgment is prepared, then you've got a finding that's indisputable because the ICJ has said Israel is an apartheid state. So if a high court judge has to find on the same basis, you can't go against the ICJ ruling. And we just want, that's the way you have to, because then when the judge is making his judgment, the overarching theme is this is an apartheid state. So if this man took a stance against it, that's the context within which you're looking at. Now, we speak to other solicitors and barristers about this, and they're saying, well, can you actually say that? Now, Frank, my colleague, Frank McGuinness, he took a challenge on in the High Court of a case of a solicitor who had been struck off for making anti-Semitic comments on social media. And some of those were indefensible. They were anti-Semitic, clearly. But Frank still took the case on because there was other comments he made which were not anti-Semitic, but they're anti-Zionist. And Frank wanted to get findings on that. And this was a case that many people wouldn't have touched. In fact, I think he struggled to get another lawyer. In the High Court, it was argued that in that same context, that calling Israel an apartheid state is not anti-Semitic. Describing Israel as a Nazi state is not in and of itself anti-Semitic. Calling for the abolition of the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Things that the IHRA definition says is anti-Semitic. A High Court judge then ruled in very clearly that these, he gave 9 or 10 examples, including the ones I just mentioned, these are not anti-Semitic. That is like binding now unless it's overruled, and there's been no appeal against it. So this is really important. This is how you win these cases, how you change the framing. Now, after we launched the case, we got contact by so many people up and down the country and internationally about bringing similar deprescription applications. Just yesterday, I had a call with lawyers from Australia, Austria, the Netherlands, and Sweden, who were interested in making similar deprescription applications in their jurisdictions. There's more interest coming in. We've been invited internationally to talk about the case. So people want to know how to do things. So we decided Riverway Law, which is the traditional structure of a solicitor's firm, is not the right entity to do this. So we're expanding into Riverway to the Sea, which is an education and training company. And that's going to be delivering this training on anti-Semitism, on bringing claims in the Employment Tribunal, on libel cases, on deprescription in the UK and beyond. We hope to set up a legal wing of that, which is going to be called the Riverway Law Centre. And unlike a traditional solicitor's firm, that's going to be a firm which will involve barristers and solicitors and experts working together under the same umbrella. So it's just it's needed for the time we're in. We're facing a genocide which is having global implications, and it requires an international response to that.
Yes, and I think you're most likely going to be inundated given the direction at which the governments are going, taking more of an authoritarian turn, introducing new laws, chilling free speech and whatnot. So I think more and more will be more and more people will be, caught up in this dragnet to basically prescribe pro-Palestinian activism. And I mean, I guess that's how you imagine what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love a world where we're not inundated
Yeah.
because, but I think the fact that we would be inundated is a positive sign because it means more and more people are willing to take a stand and they're going to face repercussions as a result. But we're very, very close, I feel, to tipping point where the narrative, it's the first time in history the Zionists have lost control of the narrative and they don't know how to handle it. They really do not. They're struggling. The state is very, very weak. And we just have to ensure that Zionism, which is dying, actually dies and doesn't get back up again.
And the kind of people that are taking a stand are your everyday people, doctors, nurses, students, teachers. These are the kind of people which the government seems to be wanting to, silence and prescribe. But Fahad, thank you for joining our podcast. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for tuning in as well. I mean, if you want to say anything further, please feel free to do so. If not, then I want to thank our viewers and everyone that's tuned in. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the space. I mean, it's always good to have time to express things clearly rather than a soundbite.
No, that's right. Exactly why I did this with you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Okay, assalamu alaikum.